Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is about the devastation of COVID 19 in the United States. The COVID 19 virus has killed more than 900,000 people in the United States alone. This is according to new research that found that the number is 57% higher than official figures. Worldwide, the study says COVID has killed nearly 7 million people. The analysis comes from researchers at the University of Washington. They estimate that roughly 44,000 more people will die of COVID by September. In the meantime, Washington Post research shows that deaths in India are 10 times more than those listed in official statistics. A new Florida law limiting mail-in votes is already being challenged in court. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed the bill into law Thursday in a closed-door event. The event restricted entry to all media except Fox News. The law limits mail-in ballots and drop boxes. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, promptly filed a federal lawsuit alleging the law violates the U.S. Constitution. The nation's largest civil rights organization claims that it violates the Voting Rights and Americans with Disability Acts. Florida is only the latest GOP-led state to push for new voting restrictions. In March, Georgia's voting limitation laws led corporations including Coca-Cola and Delta to protest. In the meantime, Texas is on its way to pass similar laws. 60 plane loads of American military equipment have already been moved out of Afghanistan. U.S. military officials also said they have identified about 1,300 pieces of equipment for destruction. American troops have been at war in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years and are now making their exit. President Joe Biden announced a full American military withdrawal from Afghanistan by September 11. There are currently 3,000 troops and thousands of U.S. contractors in the country. In the meantime, thousands of Afghans are fleeing their homes as the Taliban launched a major offensive in the Helmand province this week. The BBC reports that the Afghan government currently controls the cities and bigger towns, but is fighting for control with the Taliban. Former US President Donald Trump continues to attract media attention this week in a bid to regain his power and influence on American politics. Trump's allies have been closing in to displace Republican leader Liz Cheney from the party leadership after she said Trump is undermining American democracy and rule of law. Also this week, Trump launched his own media platform, as Facebook decided to extend a ban on his account. Twitter, in the meanwhile, suspended an account that was posting his statements. And in Arizona, one of his supporters has been contracted to recount votes of one county to prove Trump's false claims of voter fraud. Finally, last week, the FBI confiscated the equipment from the home and offices of Trump's lawyer, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, in an ongoing investigation of his business dealings. 61% of Muslim children in Massachusetts report being bullied for their faith. This is more than double the national statistics for students being bullied at school. The survey was conducted by Massachusetts Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE. It found that 1/3 of students altered their appearance or names to hide the fact that they are Muslim. And about 17% reported other forms of physical harassment, including having their hijab pulled off. The Islamic Community Center in Moorhead, Minnesota, was vandalized with hateful graffiti in late April. Police arrested 22-year-old Benjamin Endrell, who admitted to the crime. He told police he did it as a joke. This week, the mosque leaders issued a statement saying that in the spirit of Ramadan, they forgive the offenders. Mosque administrators invited Andrel and his family to visit the house of worship to better understand Islam and Muslims. Nearly 400 neighbors showed up in the days after the vandalism to help repair the damage to the mosque. In international news tonight, China has become the world's number one exporter of the COVID vaccine. This is expected to continue as the World Health Organization gave emergency use authorization today to a COVID 19 vaccine manufactured by Sinopharm, a state owned Chinese pharmaceutical company. The decision took months to make. This was because the vaccine has not faced the high level scrutiny of a rigorous medicine regulator like those in Europe and the United States. Many officials in countries that do not have such regulatory structures rely on WHO's emergency use listings to authorize vaccine rollouts for their populations. The move potentially paves the way for millions of doses to reach needy countries through a UN backed program which is rolling out COVID vaccines. COVAX, as it's called, aims to send vaccines for free to 92 lower income countries and to help another 99 countries and their territories get them. Sinopharm said that last month that over 100 million doses of its two vaccines have been used across the world. Amid a devastating surge of COVID in India, the Indian government has refused a request from private firms in the state of Punjab to commercially import liquid medical oxygen from neighboring Pakistan. The move was suggested by the Punjab government to meet a shortage of supplies to treat the rising number of COVID 19 patients. Yesterday, India reported over 412,000 new cases, a new single day record. It also reported almost 4,000 COVID related deaths, which set another new single day record. This made it the ninth consecutive day that the number of fatalities identified in a 24-hour period exceeded 3,000. The country's government rejection of an oxygen corridor from Pakistan is similar to its refusal of Pakistan's earlier offer of aid. Pakistan has offered ventilators, BPAP machines, digital x rays, and PPE to help with India's fight against COVID 19. India did not respond to the offer. This was despite the fact that the government has identified oxygen storage and manufacturing equipment as a top priority to meet a devastating shortage of critical oxygen to hospitals. The UN General Assembly President Volkan Bozkir is urging parties involved in the Kashmir dispute to refrain from steps that affect the territory's status. While addressing a news conference at the UN headquarters in New York on Tuesday, he encouraged India and Pakistan to resolve the issue through peaceful means. The two countries have fought 3 wars over Kashmir since 1947. Since August 2019, tensions between the two have further escalated. This was when India ended the nominal autonomy of the disputed Jammu and Kashmir region. This was after it imposed a military siege on its civilian population and cut the internet and other means of communication to censor opposition to the move. Pakistan described India's move as unilateral annexation. India insists it was in line with its own constitution. President Biden is promoting an infrastructure plan. Will he get it to pass the Congress? More details in this report.
It's about infrastructure.
President Biden wants to build up roads, bridges, grids, including his favorite, the Amtrak, the rail transport company. Biden also has plans to build up American families, although this will cost America around $4 trillion. He intends to tax giant companies, including those earning more than $400,000 a year. Biden states that he has nothing against millionaires or billionaires.
The American Jobs Plan will modernize 20,000 miles of highways, roads, and main streets that are in difficult shape right now.
Former President Trump also called for new infrastructure. It is President Biden, however, who has presented the big plan. The question is, will these proposals pass the Senate, where no Republican is willing to vote for such changes?
5 times a day, a Muslim calls for prayers. These sounds are a part of the Islamic landscape. Here's a report by Ali Khalaf and Saliha Farouk about the melodies of Adhan.
Muslims hear the call to prayer 5 times a day, this unique sound coming from minarets all over the world. The call, however, might also come from your smartphone in your pocket. The Islamic call to prayer is called the adhan, and it is the same all around the world. Each adhan may sound melodically different based on the country and the culture. Some countries even hold adhan competitions for children. Egyptians take their adhan very seriously. Their government holds auditions and tests to authorize people to perform the adhan. In Turkey, Sheikh Rajab of the Green Mosque calls the adhan 5 times in 5 different melodies.
أذان الفجر مقامات صباحي الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أذان الظهر مقامات حجازي الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله.
In the Middle East, there are 7 main types of melodies called maqams. These maqams have names like Nahawand, Bayati, and Hijaz. Nathawand is often used for the mid-afternoon Asr prayer, whereas Bayati is used for the midday prayer.
الحرم الله أكبر الله أكبر أذان مديني الله أكبر الله أكبر أذان هندي الله أكبر الله أكبر عند أذان أندونيسي الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر هذا أندونيسي أيوة أذان مصري أيوة الله أكبر الله أكبر.
Dedicating certain maqam to a certain time is not a random process. It is based on the maqam mood and feeling. The adhan is so loved that one of the most popular names in the Muslim world is Bilal, named after the first person to deliver the adhan during the time of the Prophet.
Thank you, Ali and Saleha, for those reports. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. Stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
So it's nothing extraordinary what we do. It's just a human to human, like brothers to brothers and sisters to sisters. Nothing else, nothing more.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid walking up and down the world's largest refugee camps. I met Sister Fatima. Well, I'm calling her a sister. She was just a teenage girl, my granddaughter's age. Her parents were slaughtered by the Burmese military, and she was dragged by the Burmese soldiers to their hut, and all night long she was violated. She lost consciousness. When she regained, and in the morning and soldiers were themselves away, she ran and hid in a vegetable patch. Some people saw her, gave her clothes, and took her 4-day-long walk to Bangladesh. Who will speak up for her? Who will stand up for her if not you and I? It's our responsibility. It's our duty, brothers and sisters in humanity. And that's why I like you to support Burma Task Force. I'm a volunteer for it. But Burma Task Force is standing up to stop this genocide, violation of our sisters. You and I are free, they are not. Please stand up, work with Burma Task Force, and donate today to Burma Task Force. Together, we can do it. Assalamu alaikum.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Mass protests continued in Colombia as international groups have begun to call attention to the violence that has resulted in at least 24 deaths and left hundreds more injured. Colombian police and military have used live ammunition against protesters. To talk about this in detail, let's go to Dr. Amina Al-Din. Over to you, Dr. Amina.
Thank you, Hena. Zuberi. I have the privilege today of talking with a young woman, Sarah Morales, who is born in the United States, but the daughter of an immigrant, and I'm going to ask about that also, from Colombia. And Colombia is all over the news because of the ongoing riots as the president tried, in the midst of extreme poverty and COVID, to introduce some tax reforms, and which will mostly affect the lower middle class and people who are surviving hand to mouth every day. So, Sarah is going to discuss just a little bit about that today with us. But first, we need to know about Colombia. Um, we hear about Bogota, and when we hear about Bogota, it's always about gangs and violence and drugs, etc. So give us your impression of Colombia.
Wow. Well, I'd say when I was younger, it definitely was that type of impression from not growing up there and hearing a lot of things from a lot of different people that weren't fully educated on the situation and also didn't have their own personal experiences from being there. It was a very like bad rep almost.
Mhm.
But as I continued to visit and as I was growing into my adulthood, as I told you earlier, I did move there back in 2018 for 6 months. And for a long period of time beforehand, there was many attempts for me to move, and I was very nervous to do so because of a lot of these ideas that were set in place for me about the dangerous side of Bogota
Mhm.
and Colombia in general. But I had a completely different experience living there. I was under the care of my grandparents who are over the age of 70, both over the age of 70. And, you know, I was a 24, 25-year-old living there, you know, already experienced my own independence living here in the United States, living on my own. And I wanted those same type of experiences there. And for a long time when I was living there, my grandparents were very hesitant to let me go out by myself, things like that, because the news there is what I personally would say is in comparison to like Fox News here in the US, but
Oh,
most all of their networks are that way. Um,
uh,
so like you're constantly getting fed negative things and bad things that are happening in the country and in the city especially. And so my grandparents were always like concerned about me going anywhere by myself, telling me like, don't have your cell phone out on the street. They will steal it from you. Don't like do this. Don't wear flashy clothes or shoes or anything because they'll try to rob you. And I never experienced any of that. And maybe I could be a person who was lucky. But I remember plenty of times where I was down in Bogota, going to like museums and things like art museums and things, the Botero Museum, one of my favorite museums, which is right downtown by Plaza de Bolivar, where there was a lot of protesting has been happening. And I would go there by myself, take the bus, everything, and it was totally fine. There were things that I might have seen, but it's not anything different than living in Washington, D.C. And,
Okay.
it's a very like big community that you feel it whenever you're around the people. Like they're constantly trying to have conversations, send you love, share things with you, and just have experiences together. And the people there are just, I always felt welcome, no matter what.
Well, that's a different picture and an important one
Yeah.
because there's the imagined Bogota and Colombia, and then there is the real Bogota and Colombia. And one of the things that has impressed me was people immediately respond to bills or the proposal of bills that will affect them. You don't find that much in the United States. People just suck it up and don't respond. Whereas in this country where people are talking about it being ravaged, people hit the streets. What was this bill proposed by, I'm assuming, this president who won't get elected again? But what were they actually protesting? What are they actually protesting?
So the protesting that started on the 28th of April
Mhm.
began because of a tax reform that Ivan Duque proposed and basically sent out that was in place, which basically would be taxing the working class at a higher rate of like 19%, and taxing people who make wages of $656 to $700 a month, taxing them at higher rates as well. And like the minimum income for Colombia for people is $250
A month?
a month, a month. So imagine like seeing that happening to you when you could be making in the middle somewhere there of like $500 a month and not being able to afford these taxes. And so the working class was being taxed on things that should be just essential items and necessities that we need on our everydays, like essential items for women, tampons, pads, books, different types of meats, dairy products, things like that, that it doesn't even really make sense for why they're raising the taxes on these things. But besides that, our essential items in our home, electricity, our sewage, internet. And besides that, with everything else that's been going on since then, within the last like week or so with these protests, they're already trying to impose these taxes on the internet, but yet now they're starting to censor the internet there. There's a whole other like level that has been dropped down to a lot of citizens in this country, in Colombia, excuse me, that concern me. Like I've never known this to happen anywhere before so badly. Well, probably other places, but not like with a personal connection to it.
Well, things happen here in the United States where taxes are increased on everything coming out of the pandemic. The food prices have arisen, but Americans don't hit the streets and protest. I am so inspired by what people are doing there. And then I find out that the police are opening fire on folk in the streets. These are not rubber bullets or gas cans. They are killing protesters.
Yeah, it is quite awful. And just to touch base back on what you said before about seeing the difference of who comes out to the streets for what, we have to keep in mind that Colombia has been in pretty much all of Colombia, right, has been in a state of oppression by their government since the 60s.
Wow.
Since FARC was created in order with the guerrilla warfare and all those things to combat the government and the military that were constantly like creating and implementing police state sanctioned violence and all of these things. It's not something sadly that's new to these people, but they're tired. They're tired and they're ready to fight, and they're willing to continue to fight until a change is instilled and a promise is made. And it's sad because, my father, he told me, I called him at the beginning of this week to just check on him to make sure he was okay. And he's like, Sarah, this is normal. This is what he grew up understanding and experiencing when he was a child in Colombia. So these protests might have been normalized for him, which is not really a good thing either, right? We have to look into that. And accepting that on his part is not something that should be normalized either.
Right.
But I think it's come to a boiling point for a lot of Colombians, pretty much all Colombians, to where they're now at a point that enough is enough, and they're not taking any more slaps in the face, and they're not going to let the government continue to run them into the ground because they're already 6 feet under. They can't go any deeper.
Well, when your father came here, was he fleeing this oppression, or how did he get here?
I wouldn't say that my father wasn't fleeing the oppression. I think that any immigrant who comes to this country with a idea of the American dream, right? The idea of succeeding far beyond what they've already been experiencing in their home countries, wanting more out of life in general. So I would say to an extent, maybe he was fleeing to have a better life.
Right.
But he also is a very, he's just an avid traveler. He loves to travel and lived in Norway before he moved here to the US, and with a family that we have there. So it was just, this was definitely his landing point and his main goal, but he was already abroad doing things and just wanted to come here, and then found my mom and married her, but sadly they're divorced. But it was definitely, I think, just more about opportunity in general for any immigrant, I believe, is to have room for growth here and a better life experience.
Well, the protests seemingly will go on. One young lady on the news was saying, okay, so he's called back this tax reform bill. We are going to continue to protest because there's so many other things. What do you think?
Right. Yeah. So there's not just the tax reform that is going on right now. There's the health, their health care, awful. Their pensions and their retirement funds doesn't even barely exist. The labor situation that they have there. The country is at a 42.5% unemployment rate.
What?
42.5%.
No.
It is absolutely. The unemployment rate went up by 14% just this past year because of COVID.
Wow.
Yeah, there are still people who are, like you said, working tooth and nail because they have to provide for their families. They stop working. But yet there are people who are going out into the streets to go to work who are not coming home because they're being murdered.
Oh my goodness.
By the police.
Protests are going to continue. How permanent do you think these protests will be? Will this be an insurrection that topples this government?
Well, I know there was somewhat of an attempt that happened in Bogota, I believe yesterday, but it really wasn't successful. The police, there's so much police force, especially in the capital, that I don't really feel like there's nothing that's going to be happening like January 6th here. But I think that the protesting is not going to stop because the military and the government and this president are constantly trying to combat, and instead of trying to be understanding and show compassion for its citizens, they're about to go into a state that's called state of intercommotion, which is basically where the president has legal right to do any and everything that he needs to bring back a state of peace into the country. And that means illegally murdering people, taking over radio stations, news stations, TV stations up to 90 days, decreasing and disrupting internet control, stopping people, entering people's homes without having actual warrants. It's very, very disturbing. But I believe that the people, like I said, are at their wits' end, and they're not going to stop. The country of Colombia and the people that hold that country up are so strong that they will not give up just because the government tries to tell them to.
Well, Sarah Morales, you have given us a woman's eye view into what's happening in Colombia, and we at Muslim Network TV can't thank you enough.
Thank you for having me.
Back to Hena Zuberi.
Thank you, Dr. Amina. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
Friends, our world is pulling together like never before. We're making huge sacrifices to keep one another safe. Scientists are working non-stop to develop COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A vaccine will get our economies moving. It will tell our loved ones we're safe again. But we have challenges we must address. Right now, huge pharmaceutical companies are keeping the vaccine research a secret. They're deciding how many vaccines get made, how much to charge for them, and who gets vaccinated. This will no doubt leave billions of people behind. Pharma companies are putting profit, not people, first. Yet, billions of dollars of taxpayers' money is funding their work. We cannot let the CEOs of a handful of pharmaceutical companies decide our future. We need a vaccine that everyone can have free of charge, no matter where you live or whether you're rich or you're poor. We need companies to share all their research so we can make enough safe vaccines for everyone. We need a vaccine owned by all of us. To end this COVID-19 pandemic, we need to pull together once more.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad!
you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken cautioned Africa to beware of China's growing role while seeking to move its Africa Command to Nigeria. On the other hand, China is not only building infrastructure but also is a major vaccine supplier to Africa. To discuss the role of these countries in the African region, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Well, the United States is happy that half of its people almost, that is, are vaccinated. China is providing vaccine to Africa and rest of the world, has become the main supplier of that. It is building infrastructures and roads in many places around the world, but especially in Africa. And that worries the United States, which is seeking to move its Africa Command to Nigeria. What is going on in the world? Is Cold War really out there? To discuss that with us is Netfa Freeman. He's an organizer with Pan-African Community Association. Welcome to Muslim Network TV, Netfa.
Thank you for having me. The Pan-African Community Action.
Community action, not association. All right. Action has more action than association, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us what China is doing in Africa.
Well, I think it might be better. Well, I'll touch on both because I think what's really telling and it's what's really important that people know less about is what the U.S. is doing in Africa and what the U.S. has been doing in Africa and how and why it's responding to China the way it is, China's efforts in Africa and really the world. And as you said in the opening, it's definitely at least a Cold War, and it's actually really touching on becoming a hot war pretty quickly because of the aggressive response by the United States, militarized response. In Africa, China is implementing what is had called the Belt and Road Initiative that has been doing around the world, but in Africa and a lot of places, this takes the form of helping or just building infrastructure. I mean, maybe I should stay away from the word helping because people will find that loaded. But the point is, it's building infrastructure, roads, different projects that Africa really does need and has been neglected because of the centuries of colonialism, and that the relationship that the West and the United States have had in Africa is not one of building infrastructure. It's been one of complete plunder and rape and exploitation of the raw minerals and the labor and the markets of Africa. And so in response to this, the United States quickly finding itself waning as a power in the world, a global economic power, its response is militarism. And in Africa, it's taken the form of AFRICOM. So, AFRICOM is the U.S. Africa Command military. It's a military command that has existed since 2008. And it is in response to many things, but admittedly to the powers to be, the emergence of China on the global stage as a power, and that so their response is militarism. They have 29 military bases, military to military relationships, with 53 of the 54 African countries. They claim to be fighting terrorism, so they're not not fighting China on the continent, because China doesn't really have, maybe one military base there, and its presence is not a militarized one. But for the United States, seems to be their way of sort of, it's a gangster move to try to press the comprador class, ruling classes of the African countries, to not negate or renege on their commitment or their subservience to U.S. and Western capital and finance domination. And so
there was a time in Africa when African countries will play with the Soviet Union and United States. Is that Soviet Union play with the US is now changed to China and the United States, because small countries like to have deals with different countries to move their interests forward. So how African countries are responding to this new dynamism?
Mhm. So this is kind of like this. I'm going to try to, because it also during the time of the Cold War in between the U.S. Soviet Union and the U.S. And the Soviet Union and the U.S. Africa was emerging as from colonization, and it was an independence movement that swept Africa, and the masses were trying to, decolonize and plot a course for self-determination and united Africa. And the call then was around socialism, and they were also participating heavily in what was known as the non-aligned movement. So whatever kind of embrace some of the revolutionary African countries had, or not embrace, but relationship they had with the Soviet Union, was based on their own self-interest. Kwame Nkrumah, president of the first independent country, Ghana, he was famous for saying, when asked, "Are you looking to the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc?" He said, "We're looking forward." So whatever they had was based on a tactical thing to look forward, to figure out how to be so now that Africa is pretty much dominated by neocolonialism, not real independence, just that you have people, leaders who have capitulated to Western domination, who have continued and what we refer to as continued the rape and pillage of the continent's raw minerals, so that the continent is not self-reliant, it's not producing so much of what the mass of the people really need. And now as China has emerged to replace the Soviet, I guess, emerged as a something, not to replace, but they've replaced the Soviet Union as a superpower. And then the Soviet Union is broken up. It's no longer the Soviet Union anymore. But we're looking at leaders who, like you're rightly so, they prefer having diversified economic relationships and trade. And China, because of China's emergence, it challenges that position. And so they're not revolutionary leaders like people had before during the independence movement and what the Cold War was and having to deal with grapple with the Soviet Union U.S. Cold War, but they are trying to look for diversified, and alternatives to trade.
Looks
So they're not
that African countries are looking towards China for the development aid and progress and business and trade, while with the United States towards the military contacts and military strength. Will that be a right way to put it?
That's absolutely right. It's exactly how it is. I mean, right now we're seeing across the continent this emergence of like religious fanaticism or extremists, and it's taken the form of religion, but it's not. Doesn't really have to do with religion. It has to do with the neglect that a capitalist Western dominated Africa has had, the neglect of the people, and then also the militarized pursuits that the United States takes around the world, like for example in Libya, destroying Libya, and so people turn to radicalism, and so now in the name of trying to fight terrorism, the terrorism, really, you could say that the United States is largely responsible for causing and fostering in the United States, in Africa. Now, in that name of that, they're using AFRICOM and their assistance to African countries to fend off. But China is the one that they are having to look to. The countries are having to look to for real substantial development that's really needed, and any semblance of, like you said, infrastructure and industry and real trade, and then it's also bilateral relationships. The United States it pretty much gangsterizes what needs with the financial institutions like the World Bank and the IMF and all that. It sort of bullies countries into having one-sided relationships that don't really benefit the continent of Africa, that's not the same with China.
So President Biden has spoken to the British Prime Minister Johnson, and that why we shouldn't compete with China in building our own infrastructure projects in Africa. Do you think there is a hope of that?
Well, I think they realize that that's really the only way to compete, is to try to do infrastructural projects. However, they will be at a disadvantage with China because China has its economic structure has very socialist based, and it's able to diversify and produce and do things in a way that the United States system of beholdenness to transnational corporations and the profit motive prevents them from actually being able to match that. And then also they're late in the game. All these decades of not doing anything for the continent of Africa, it's going to be hard for them to do it. And the militarism has become an industry in itself. So the military contractors will want to continue what's going on there. And so it's something they're realizing that they're trying to catch up with, but it's also not for the best interest of China, of Africa. Again, it's only for their own, world hegemonic, domination or full spectrum dominance that they pursue. And so whenever that's the motive, and they can't even recognize, the interest and the value of the interest of the African people at large, and really only the comprador class, then they're not really going to be able to match what China does.
Don't you think China and the United States, as well as any African country, all of them pursue based on their national interest?
Absolutely. I think they do, and we can't get, but what the difference is that China has emerged, it being some socialist and having some socialist infrastructure, having a socialist infrastructure where it is emerging and has companies and all that stuff. It also emerges out of a colonialism. It has that common interest. It is participated in the international, like the socialist internationals and things where they recognize the needs of different countries, and also the non-aligned movement, which was realizing that former colonized countries had to plot their own course. So even in pursuing their own interests, they understand their own interests is better served in a more cooperative manner with other countries in the world. The United States and the Western countries don't operate in that way. They do not think about cooperation. You can see it with everything they're doing around the world. It's complete dominance. It has to be dominance, our way or the highway, and so that's why. So yeah, we shouldn't have any illusions. The countries aren't pursuing their own interests, but how do we define our interests? How are our interests best served?
Tell me this: how I mean, in this thing that China and America competing in Africa, how is it playing out in the public opinion and African people in Africa? Has anybody will keep keeping an eye how people feel about it?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say from this vantage point, doing polls and things like that, because of the propaganda war, particularly waged by the United States that we're seeing. So we hear a lot of, not now, but I mean, even before, because the United States position is also becoming more nakedly clear. But before, you would hear a lot of, Africans complaining. You would hear complaints, but not like a study done, like a poll or anything like that would really give us a better thing. You just hear anecdotal remarks about, China's role in Africa and there being exploitation or discrimination, these kind of things. But then to the neglect of the more insidious and what you call it, murderous, I guess the word I'm trying to use, role of the United States and the West, not just West, France also. Its role is very militarized, and people die from these drone strikes. There's a heavy drone war in Somalia. Their pursuits, their different missions in various African countries are killing people, which is driving people to, studies have been done to know that those who are going to more what they would call terrorism and terrorist extremist groups are being driven there by the participation or the involvement of the Western countries on the continent of Africa. And so what people really think on the ground, and I think this is really has to do with the solution, is like we have to figure out what is decolonization. How do people have real participatory democracy on the ground in countries in Africa, and being able to really decide for themselves on the international level what sort of relationships they want to have with different countries. When people complain about China, they're not thinking about the fact, or any country really that's in the and in Africa, they're not also looking at the class aspect, what we refer to as the comparator class. There's not serving the masses of the people and is basing relationships based on their own interests and not the masses of their people. So instead of decrying China, we need to be talking about how do we, have a independent, united and government of Africa that's actually serving the mass of the people and not based on capitalist imperialist exploitation.
Netfa, there was a time, there is a whole lot of African American like yourself were interested talking about Africa. Do you think African Americans have done more inward and there is not much of interest left when it comes to affairs of African people?
That's an excellent question. I think, wow. So I think one of the things, and I would have to go back again to the effects and the impact of propaganda. So there's been a job done on Africans, and I don't really refer to myself as an African American, and those who are Pan-Africanists refer to ourselves as Africans, but maybe in some new Africans and that are outside of the continent of Africa. But there's been a job done to dissuade us from identifying with Africa. I mean, particularly since the Black Power movement and the emergence of more like the time that you identify, where Africans were, Black people in the United States, African Americans, if people will, were paying attention to Africa and thinking, and there was the emergence, there was pride in the anti-colonial movements and decolonization, but that has been intentionally attacked in terms of our pride and what we understand and know about Africa, how it's taught to us in schools, what the media depicts, and everything is about, it's dire and there's warlords and all that. Remember some of these types of portrayals, when there's actually a whole lot that we need to understand and can be proud of, and also connections that we need to be making, like for our organization. So like we're doing the U.S. Out of Africa Shut Down AFRICOM campaign, and part of that is building a U.S. Out of Africa network, which includes relationships with our family on the ground in the continent of Africa. So we're forging relationships and we don't just have to know about it or learn about it. But yes, I think there's work to be done, but also the emergence of the like what we refer to as the Black Lives Matter movement gives that potential. We're seeing a little bit more of people understanding, particularly when it comes to militarization. This 1033 program, this militarizing the police on the continent in the United States, when we realize our colonized status instead of colonial this U.S., then it's easier for us to also recognize our connection and our shared interest and shared relationship and historical relationship to the militarized continent of Africa, militarized by the United States. And so we're in it.
Well, thank you so much, Netfa Freeman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Keep watching Muslim Network News. For more, visit our website, muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.
Special thanks to our official supporter, Zagat Foundation of America.